Today is Tuesday, correct? August 6th, 2024, and this is a meeting of the Policy Committee of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. Superintendent Wimber, can you just confirm that the meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Great. How about we quick start with some introductions here as to, for the record, we have attendance. We can start with John.
John Donaldson.
Chris Swigert, board member.
Chad Tomaz, board member.
Jen Wimmer, superintendent.
Tim Harder, Director of Facilities and Technology.
Great. Now the meeting is called to order. Let's recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have 4 discussion items on our agenda this afternoon. We're going to start with policy language related to metal detector use. And Superintendent Wimmer or Mr. Harder, are you going to kick that off?
You bet. I will start this evening. So the last time we talked about this in March, we had presented a draft policy for review. And the feedback of the committee was they appreciated the policy. We talked about a little bit more in depth of a guidebook or a manual around how this would play out. So since then, Superintendent Wimmer and her admin assistant Peggy were able to clarify what the appropriate number of the policy would be if we were to adopt it. So that has now been included in there. So you have an attachment of the original policy, which, as a reminder to the public who may be watching or to our board members, really breaks down 2 reasons why we would use metal detection in our school district here. Number 1 would be for building entry and event entry security. The second would be individual student searches and the use of that through that student search process. We do have a student search policy, and there are laws around that also guide that. This would focus purely on the use of a metal detection device for that. So the policy is really written into those 2 kind of categories and how we would notify families and those entering our buildings and so forth. Also attached in your board docs this evening is a draft guidebook of what we would provide for those staff who would go through this. So it references the board policies, how we would notify this. You know, the facilities department will provide the authorized signs and posters if we were to use this at a building entry point and so forth. In our policy, and we had a discussion that our staff would be trained yearly in terms of what this would look like. That training would be dependent upon what products we purchased and so forth. But if you were to be authorized to use this technology, you would have to go through a yearly training and reminder. That might be put on by our staff here, could be in conjunction with our law enforcement or the vendor of the product at that point in time. Then you see 2 different categories of, as we talked about, security screening procedures. The first is the in-depth guidelines for running an event security. And so this is, we want to scan everybody who comes into a building, an athletic event, a concert, whatever that might be, in terms of what that looks like. Some of the language is reiterated from the policy. So one of the things we had talked about previously was the fact that if we were to try to scan everybody, that might not work. We might want to go to a randomized type of a solution. The policy recommendation and the committee stuck on the fact that we would only accept 1 randomized number process where we would say every 3rd, every 4th, every 5th person, and that would stay into play the entire day. So that way I'm not picking out a specific person and saying, oh, Miss Wimmer, she looks like the person I should scan today. It truly makes it randomized. And it goes through all the little steps of what to do as somebody comes through the metal detection process, if they alert, what to do, how we would move them to a private screening location, in terms of that event entry, and then when the administrator would have to be involved. Obviously, if we are going to do some sort of metal detection scanning, we are going to have an administrator on site who would run that and be there when we may involve law enforcement. Also, if we are to find something, that we would be contacting the parent if it is a West Bend School District student. So it outlines that entire process of what that would look like for our buildings. The second portion of that then goes into detail, same concept except for individual student searches. So we have a suspicion that Ms. Wimmer has something on her or in her bag or something like that. This is what this would look like as we would go through this. And so, who it can be completed by, we would only allow individual student searches based upon the policy language to be done by administrators. We would require that we would have a witness in the room. The witness does not have to be an administrator who would be a note taker. They would still have to follow all of the different policies here, around 446, but it talks about that it would be done in a private location. They can request law enforcement depending upon the situation at any point in time in the process. That would be up to the administrator. The administrator explains the process, please remove items from you. They would go through and scan them twice. Most products with the handheld type wand recommend a full front and back scan, top to bottom. Every single one that I found recommends, and I put it in the language, that you don't go between body parts, so it isn't so much the under the arms, you do the front here, you don't go between the legs, it's front and back at that point in time. So that policy, or that language is referenced in there also. Talks about then proceeding to go and scan student, potentially their bags, backpacks, other items that they may have with them. The notification process obviously is something is found, and then how it would be documented on our end. And so we would actually provide this to anybody who is trained, that we would run through the training. Obviously, for the student search side of it, every single one of our building administrators would be trained in that process. When it comes to security scanning for building entry, we would need a much larger team to pull something like that off. I did reference in there that we could also look at a security company. So when you talk about training, somebody who already certifies and does security work, if that's something the board would want to go down the route, if we wanted to do that, even if it's something that's outsourced for crowd support and so forth. And then the last thing in there, we don't have the documentation to put in, is if we were to go down this route and go through this policy and go through this guidebook, we would insert any relevant documentation, guides, manuals for the products that we would purchase, rent, or lease. And so many of them have almost this visual image of how I would use the handheld detector. They have the cheat sheet of the 180-page manual. We would add that to our manual here, those cheat sheets as we go forward. So looking for some guidance on this, if this is enough detail, other questions you may have as we continue through this process and going forward.
Committee members, any impressions?
My only
Go ahead.
My only suggestion would just be for the manuals for the instruments that we use is to just reference in the policy part of it to review updated manuals on file, and then not actually include the manuals here, because then every time we get a new piece of equipment, we'd have to change the policy.
Okay.
We'd have to update the policy. So it seems like it'd be easier just to have that as something you could reference,
Okay.
but just keep that
He's got it in the guidebook.
Yep,
which
that's in
is
the guidebook
outside of
portion.
policy.
not in the policy.
Yep.
Perfect.
That's
But
why
then,
we-
yep. But the
Perfect.
idea of the guidebook and in the policy references, we would bring that guidebook back to this committee every year for review.
Sure,
So
that makes
not
sense.
just that, but if all of a sudden we do this for a year and all of a sudden we have some recommendations in the guidebook change, it comes to you for approval and review versus just us making changes at that point.
No
in
problem.
time.
Thanks for clarifying.
So I like the layout and the approach of it. I think it really addresses all elements nicely. Just a couple of questions, and you addressed one of them. So there are a number of spots where it says only administrators may utilize metal detection devices as part of a student search. I'd like that. Do we need some flexibility in there but in the event that we have a large event, we may use outside trained security professionals. We may use law enforcement. So might want to contemplate that just to leave a little bit of wiggle room. I think the intent here is we don't want untrained novices doing this. We want only trained administrators. But as it relates to capacity,
The
If
other
you-
piece is if they were at if they're a student at a general event. So let's say something happened where I have to implement these in a football game. I'm gonna be screening general public as well as students. I'm not gonna have a separate administrator for that, so.
Yep, so I did add language under the staff training related to utilize metal detection devices, school district staff, or outside companies who specialize in that training. And I think of, we talked about the first time we talked about doing metal detection, doing event entry. That's a lot of people and a lot of staff that we may not have compared to, I just need to search 3 students at that point in
Right.
time. So we would look a little bit of that.
Clarity in
Yep.
there that shows those different situations.
yeah, just to make sure that it's scalable when you need to, that we've not overly restricted ourselves to say, it's only administrators, and you've got a crowd of 10,000 people. That might not be practical. Otherwise, I thought the elements are really good as we move forward with we've got a policy here, and then in the manual. Would the manual be considered something like an AR, meaning if there needs to be a tweak to the manual, do we need to come back to the policy committee every single time? That's kind of consistent with, I think, what Chad was asking a bit here, too.
So right now, it's not set up as an AR. We do have the ability to be a little bit more nimble with an AR if I notice the board that we're changing something or doing. You do have that, but right now, it's not even held to that. It's a guidebook so that we can do that. But then we bring it forward annually, like here's where we are.
Okay.
In that, so you'd have some accountability and consistent review, but that way, you know, if something shifts in a vendor and something of that nature.
Sure. Very good. Oh, we just want to be sure, is our AV okay?
No, your mic, I can't
Okay.
hear you. Is it
Oh.
on?
You do it.
Is that- Great.
But now it's on.
All right, thank you for that. No, that's great, because I'd also, if, in the event there needs to be something changed with a bit of urgency, you'd hate to have to wait, 3 weeks for a board meeting, but obviously consulting us as to what changes there are. So I think it's handled well. Just wanted to bring that up. John, any thoughts on your side?
No, I think you guys said it. I think it's a good layout, and having all the pieces inside the guidebook, or, keep it updated. So I think it's a good plan.
Good.
Would you like us to consider then, because the overall policy, I think is good, do you want us to consider bringing forward the policy for discussion, first discussion with the full board?
Any objections, committee members? I'd be in support.
Yeah, I think it's ready.
Okay?
We'll include the guidebook just for reference, so they can see how that's coming together. But then, at least we have a policy, if we want to explore something, look at vendors, that's possible.
Okay. Well, with that, I think we can move to our next item on the agenda, which is review of athletic code.
This is just to update the board. Thank you, Tim, for your work on that.
Thanks, Tim, we appreciate it.
Our athletic directors at the high school level, Aaron Felber, who's at West, Molly Hangst, who's at East, as well as Director of Student Services, Emily Melstrand, have been working on updating. What you see there is last year's athletic code of conduct. So athletes aren't, they don't have a lesser standard for code of conduct or behavior. It just lays out additional consequences and things of that nature and what their expectations are, both at school and as a representative out in the community and an athlete. So you see that. It has been inherited by all, and they were just ready to kind of kick over that rock and review it. So they've done a lot of comprehensive research in looking at different athletic handbooks from Southeast Wisconsin, then specifically the conference that we're in, that our athletes are competing in, and then they've also gathered student athletes as well as families, so parents and guardians of athletes, and had a couple rounds of just discussion going through it, talking about sharing some of their research, what they need clarity on, all those pieces. So I'm just bringing this forward to alert you to kind of what's going on in that work, because I would call on our team to help them. When they come up with a draft, I would recommend that they bring that here for us to take a look. It's an item, if they redo a handbook like that, it would go to the full board for discussion and action. But I just think kind of our view with policy language and all of those pieces would be helpful for them. So I'll just lean on this team to do that. I just wanted to foreshadow that and talk through that approach. And again, if you, as you look through it and kind of with that policy mindset, we're well-versed at writing things. If you've got any feedback in the interim, send it to me so that I can get it to those teams as they work on preparing a draft.
This is really a homework assignment for us.
Yeah, and like I said, they've got a lot of great people and working on it as well. So they just aren't, they're going to be getting to the point where they bring forward a draft, and I'm recommending that they bring it to us first so that we can help them get it over the finish line then with the full board. So thank you.
All right, any questions?
Just is this what's in here, the final edit?
No, not at all. That was their current one. They
Okay.
just now had feedback sessions, and they're taking that feedback to think about a new draft. So that is what they had in the past.
So
So
good-
that
good
doesn't
point.
represent any draft. It just,
But to familiarize
Here's what
yourself with,
was.
we can familiarize ourselves with the
Correct.
current, but
Mhm.
we'll expect then a revised
a
draft going
revised
forward.
draft.
Okay,
That's good.
all right. A little foreshadowing there. All right, third item, recommendations for book club selection and notification, sexual content. And Superintendent Wimmer, I think you had the idea of a little workshop for this.
I'm going to go through, so we talked about this with the full board as a discussion item, and then it was going back to both committees, curriculum committee as well as policy committee. So I watched the curriculum committee kind of try and untangle a pretty complex subject and a lot of statutory language. So I took some of those takeaways from watching that discussion where they were getting hung up on some of that language, and I created this document for us. So if I can take a moment and have you look at this. So I gave you on this document the current language, and we knew, as we talked about this, we need to expand that. It wasn't clear, but we needed to work with something. So we had some proposed language in there, just expanding what sexual content means. And then we took and unpacked the statute into the two columns. So I would propose that we use that language for policy, and then we use this, so what does that mean, right? So procedures for how we interpret that policy. So that any team that's vetting content could pick this up and use it for our book club books. So there were two pieces, and I separated those because, again, that was an interpretation when they were thinking about the visual analysis. I don't know if they're thinking about how they look at books, and I'm like, that is literally the picture, photograph, or a representation.
You mean the curriculum committee when they were looking through?
Yep, so really, I visually laid out that there's text, and sometimes there could be a graphic novel, there could be pictures. This is why your science book isn't all of a sudden sexual content. You know, if there's a picture of anatomy, those kinds of things. It's when you're vetting. You're vetting in two lanes. There's text and there's visuals. Everyone good to go on that first? Okay. So then we talked about the components of the statute, where it gets into sexual excitement, sexually explicit conduct, sadomasochistic abuse, and physical torture or brutality. Those were the bullet points of what do those really mean. And then I actually included a little bit more language directly from the statute of what does that mean? So if someone's looking for those things in a book, what is it that they mean? Same thing with a visual. So what do I mean by a visual, right? So I think that gets them some of those expanded definitions. And then, so if those things are present, right? So that's why I kind of had that in bucket on the bottom. This was that whole statutory language. Chris, you'll probably remember, it's the prurient or shameful nature
The prurient or
around
morbid, yeah.
Yeah, around children. They're like, no one can unpack this. We don't know what that means. So I unpacked it here using legal definitions around that. So I just took, if you remember that line around the prurient, shameful, morbid around children, here's what that means. So does it do any of these things, you know, as they relate? And then are there any restrictions? So it's helping you to identify what's falling into these categories, and then does it weed it out, or does it restrict it in some way for us?
So I think what you're saying is, from the statutory perspective, it would have to hit one of the two boxes on top as well as the bottom box.
Yep. Yeah, because there may be something, and I've got some samples to go with each, because there might be a sample where it has a statement around sexual excitement in a book, and we might say, you know what, that's allowable. That's not a really big narrative. That's this. Here's where it's falling. Or you know what, that's going to be in that 11th, 12th grade, because they had started talking about, you know, there's even kind of different buckets. Navigating a 15-year-old new to high school versus you've got an 18-year-old senior. So they started talking about 9, 12, 11, 9, 10, 11, 12 too. So we're here to help make the words fit some of those buckets.
So that's really part of this, the idea of, all right, we looked at the statute, you've unpacked it, here are the words.
And I don't think this is perfect by any means, but at least it gets us an exercise to complete, right? So are there any questions about this or anything on face value on this, like we should probably clean up? And we might, as I show you some examples, you might go, oh, I'm confused by that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so we'll walk through some examples,
We'll walk
but
through
if there's
some
anything.
examples, and that's going to help lead us to, you know what, this isn't clear still. Because that's what they, at the curriculum committee, they're like, we're struggling with this piece for good reason.
To me, this looks like it's been pulled pretty much right from the statutes.
Correct.
So
And that's
that's-
where we were. It's just kind of giving them back some language, if you will, to help know. And like I said, we don't have to put all this in policy. It can be a supplementary piece of, so what exactly do we mean by that? All right? Ready for some samples? These, again, I can't say it enough. I put it in there online, and I'm going to say it publicly. These do not represent books that are in our schools or use. I pulled samples of anything.
Just a
Some
broad
are- yep,
literature.
Some are absolutely no way, and all of us agree, and some of them are like, oh my goodness, yep, of course that could be in.
Yeah, but again,
right?
just to triple reiterate, these are not books under
Nope.
consideration.
No,
This is
not at all. They are for us to go through this exercise so we can help refine this. So if we're looking at sexual excitement, so take a look back at your sheet, kind of reread for yourself. What does sexual excitement mean, right? And I've got that right at the top. And then I've got a sample, right? It's using the word penis in it, and it uses the word semi-erect in that. So when you look in that passage, is it explicit, detailed description of sexual excitement? And I think it's easier to think, all right, think of your 11th and 12th graders right now. Is that passage allowable if it showed up in a book that we were asking? And again, these are all parent permission text as well in our book club books. So there's even an additional layer in here.
So you're talking about the first one, correct?
Yep, yep, when you look at it, these are just samples on that first one. Again, I might read that and say that's not very explicit or detailed. That's, they're,
Yeah, so I'm looking at, so we're not talking about there's nothing visual here.
Nope.
So I'm just kind of
You're
walking
looking
through
at the
thought
text
process of just
analysis.
applying. Yeah, so it's text analysis. So of the 4 bullet points, I'm kind of working in reverse. Physical torture, brutality, no. Sadomasochistic abuse.
nope, I pulled you just a straight sexual excitement one.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
I narrowed it
not
for
that.
you so we could focus on getting those definitions.
So this is a passage that has some elements of, right, on the bullet point around sexual excitement. So the question really is, according to the statute, is it explicit in detail or a narrative account of it? And
So I might read that and say, I don't think that's explicit.
and it's not, it's,
And again, let's
Yeah.
keep our frame of mind in an 11th to 12th grader. We can talk about different levels later. I think we're all on board around, this isn't appropriate for young kids.
sure.
Let's just think about, would this passage be allowable for 11th and 12th graders to read with permission?
With permission, and I think that's the key.
With
correct?
permission.
Yeah.
I don't see how it wouldn't fall into that sexual excitement piece and then reflects or produces sexual desire. I mean, this is talking about a dick pic.
Exactly.
And this is, I would say, wildly inappropriate considering the issues we have with kids texting other kids inappropriate pictures. So I think it just feeds into that narrative or the desire for kids' attention from somebody else with that type of, mentality. So I would say it's inappropriate and I would say no to it.
And that's a good piece. So, because you're going to have no on 2 grounds. No on the language as written, and no, as you're saying, like, hey, this is a line I don't want to see crossed in our schools, but then we got to make sure our language reflects all that kind of stuff. So I think that's where we're going to really take a step forward on. So does the definition meet? Because to your point, it doesn't sanction them necessarily.
Right, and, when I look at the statutory definition that we've got here, the explicit or detailed account of sexual excitement, it's not a depiction, so to speak, between 2 people in an act.
No.
Instead, it's, oh, have you gotten a picture?
Yep.
I agree with John. It's one of those things where, I don't know, some parents may say, I just don't think that that's appropriate. I don't know that it would fit the definition of the statute where, you talk about getting a district attorney involved because, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so.
I don't know that it meets that threshold as written.
So is the idea, though, that kind of there are three categories here. One is, we believe if this is the appropriate test, and if it fits this test, it would not even be able to be available for parental consideration.
So maybe an easier way is to take a look at number 3.
Okay.
I would read number 3 and say that is very explicit and detailed description. And I think everyone could read that and think that is explicit and detailed.
I think so I think 3 hits the first criteria, text analysis, and even if you go on further, it also then hits the second one.
Correct.
That I would completely agree on 3.
Yeah,
Right.
I would, too.
I think 2, and again, this is just my opinion, I think 2 hits 1 and probably also 2 as well. And that one's it's less explicit. That's subjective, of course, but I would say that would fall in. And then number 1, I would say does not, in my opinion. It's talking about a topic that could be considered lewd, of course. However, I don't think it's done in a way that's meant to cause arousal, according to the
Right.
definition. It's describing. It's basically one person asking another person, "Hey, do you know what this is?" And someone saying, "Yeah, I've seen it." I don't think it's like, "Yeah, it was." Then going into how it made them feel and all this other stuff.
John?
Yeah,
Sorry, John?
I would just say at the same time, I got to think of, what kind of influence this might have on students. A sentence like that. I mean, oh, I never thought about doing that. Maybe I should try that. And then we're in a totally different, scenario where we got kids sending, and I don't doubt that happens today. I know the world is perverse like this.
Yeah, so
And stuff like this goes out. And we're talking that, I just don't want to make it a point I'm not going to condone that in a book at all. And just because it condones, I think, maybe the action of doing that is okay. Oh, the let us have it in the book. It's not bad.
Yeah.
That,
Well, I think too, when you're, even before you get to this, and when you're looking at kind of the merit of the text, its value, that kind of thing, and we've talked about this before, that we don't want to have any texts that glorify things. So we talked about it very specifically around drugs, alcohol, promiscuity, anything like that that's glorifying that in some way. Same thing, like you said, I don't want to give everyone like, hey, this is great, go try this.
And that's-
So hopefully that's before we're even looking at any of these pieces, that we've talked about the redemptive value of, characters struggling and coming out the other side of something.
Well, and that's a good point. So not that we would ever do this, but just to kind of stress test this a little bit. So to John's point, let's say it's a book that has absolutely nothing to do with sexual content, but it's about gambling. It's about kidnapping. It's about all sorts of things where we don't have
Right.
that, but we would say there are other filters in place around that. Just shouldn't even come forward because it's glorifying. I mean,
Correct.
like literally talking about the merits and the virtues, so to speak, of something like kidnapping or something
Right.
like that. It wouldn't make it. So there is a filter for if it is glorifying something like this, like glorification of taking illicit pictures, which may not actually meet the definition here, but that just doesn't make sense. There's another filter in place for that, correct?
Yes, and like I said, that's kind of the value of the text overall, that precedes any of, as we get into these points.
I just would say, this sexual incitement, you're sending a picture of a genital.
Yep.
And it does reflect or produce sexual desire. Somebody in this scenario, on one end or the other, has a sexual desire.
I'm not reading it that way.
Well, how do you send a dick pic to somebody?
This isn't that's not what it's saying, John.
It-
It's saying, have you ever gotten one? And the guy said, yeah, or whoever says, yeah, I seen one. And then it's basically saying it's kind of a dumb way as a form of introduction, like, yep, that's a penis, how am I supposed to react to that? It doesn't sound to me like someone, like either one of these are the people who've sent it.
It sounds to me like they're questioning something that happened to them, to me. I would like to see the rest of the
Well,
context of this.
you're at a disadvantage because you don't have the context of the whole book,
I mean, how
or
did-
even
a
that
sentence
passage, right?
before might be like, oh, I got this ridiculous picture today.
Correct.
Right.
Have you ever, but so, that's what I'm saying. So here
So-
you are following in this bottom part where the other end, the person sending that picture, reflects or produces sexual desire.
So is it that seeing, like, we'd have to analyze the context for that so that we're really solid on, we're not glorifying it, something like that, we're not doing to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I would be a no on either one of these. That's,
Well,
that's me.
and-
and
But no,
that's- I
because
just
you
wanna
don't-
be on record for, I
Yeah,
don't
no,
want any of
because
this
you don't have
garbage in there.
context
Yeah.
too, right? Like you said, if the lines before were, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm
it-
reading
it-
only
you-
what's
you-
available.
If
yeah,
this
you
is a
view it
completely
differently.
different scenario and this is a parent educating their student on, so that's a completely different thing, but we have no idea. As I see it,
Yeah.
I'm taking it from this person A got this picture,
Mm-hmm.
and they're asking person B about the scenario. So in my mind, a picture has been exchanged somewhere
Yep.
in this little blurb that we have
Which
here.
we tell
which
kids
I have
that's
no idea
illegal.
what's in. Yep.
No, that's a fair point. What I like about this conversation is, I think we're having the conversation about the right stuff. Because,
Exactly.
because when we have these words, like this is why courts exist for all their virtues and vices, that you have these standards to, we may agree or disagree on the application, but at least we're talking about the right stuff. I mean, it seems like we're talking about the right stuff here, so.
And that's what we're doing. We're testing up against this language, right? So that, because even here, we've got a fair amount of interpretation, right? Because you want it to be that four people could look at it and interpret that together. So what I'm hearing on this is we need to kind of give enough context when you're analyzing, so you're looking at that second box, to John's point, around what was the larger context of this. And then, two, is this, you can also look at the totality. You have to analyze passages, right? Which is easy, but you're analyzing the totality. Is this a one-off incident inside of a 500-page book? Or is this what the whole book is about? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Then
I
it
mean,
would be every
obviously you need-
passage.
yeah.
It's, obviously, this is
You need
one
some
passage
context.
in a book.
So I mean, two and three, for sure three, two as well, probably, barring some extraordinary circumstance, I would say would definitely fall into the criteria that, that would
we've
be
set.
like, that we said. One, I would say you would need some context around, and that might be one where you're like, hey, this hits the criteria for discussion at a board level. I wouldn't say that what I'm reading in just this picture, in just this sentence, makes this book completely ineligible. I have no context around it.
So that's a good piece. So not necessarily that I have to tweak the language, it's that you need a larger context and kind of, like you said, totality of the book and the bigger context around that passage.
Yeah,
The intent of the passage.
if curriculum committee were reviewing this and said, you know what, these three, we feel pretty confident the bottom two just don't meet.
Yep.
First one, we want broader analysis on that,
Yep.
or we want it to go up to board level discussion. That would be an appropriate place for that to go, in my opinion.
And I remember from the statute, it talks about the explicit and detailed description or narrative account, and so, and I think it's okay for us, either at curriculum or at the board level or at this level, to have, we may not always agree on what's explicit and detailed, but we're having the right discussion about the right elements here.
It
We've
helps
broken
us-
it down into 4 bullet points, and compared to the current language, which is very, very brief, I mean, I think it allows us to have a much richer and robust discussion about it.
Okay. I've got some good takeaways on that piece around context. Next, I've got a couple samples of sexually explicit conduct. Sexually explicit is
Bullet
a
point two.
detailed
Second bullet point.
description. Yep, it's a detailed description or narrative account where it's sexually explicit, and I've got that there. Actual or simulated sexual intercourse, bestiality, or masturbation is noted in text.
4 to me, I think is, hits the criteria, in my opinion.
And I think 5 would need context, like
Yeah.
that first one. This could be someone who's describing something at a police station, for all I know. You know what I mean? So again, I think this would be one where it would be appropriate for it to have to go for further analysis.
Perfect.
Heist your nightgown, round your waist, plunge in is a police station example. I just don't,
I'm
that's
just
pretty clear.
No, I understand what it's talking about. What I'm saying is this could be somebody describing an event that happened to a person or something, you know.
See where you're going? Okay.
That's all I'm saying, is that it's one single sentence. It could be a dialogue of somebody saying, is this, you know, is this what happened to you? Or questioning somebody on something. And it's just, you know, and it's about, it has nothing to do with really the book, other than this is a traumatic event that happened to somebody.
But it would warrant,
And
it
I
would
didn't-
warrant more review.
We didn't make it easy, right? Like, there's, it's all over the
Well,
spectrum
that's why you need
because
context.
that's why we've got to talk about it. So,
But again, I think we're talking about the right things.
yep, so getting some context around, like you said, the intent, the larger intent, and how it falls within the scope of the book as well. Maybe this is, like you said, a retelling of something traumatic. It's one slice in a book, that kind of piece. So, but also too, to that point, to me, if I were going into any more of detail, like these are one sentences.
Right.
If I'm looking at a paragraph of something that's really like I'm gonna say that we would say no on that
Yeah. For
on
sure.
that. So I just want to make sure,
Yep.
because like I said, I gave us the difficult ones to interpret. But if there was a very graphic and detailed account that's like a whole solid paragraph and
Yeah, 4 is
Really-
clearly descriptive of basically like a narrator of the book.
right.
That, to me, you don't need to do anything extra for that one.
Okay.
5 is just, again, I don't know, give me a couple sentences before and after. And
And it helps me because then I can gather a couple that are going to be a clear no to you and a yes, maybe a yes for you in this lane, based on kind of what you're saying. Then we've got samples of abuse, right? Sadomasochistic abuse, physical torture, brutality. That's anything, force, pain, any kind of scene of rape, and anything like that. And you've got varying degrees of accounting in here. You know, you've got some that are innuendo, you've got some that are a little bit more detailed. And there's certainly more samples, and like I said, they're a whole continuum here. So in that first one, take a look at number 6. They're using phrases like someone who used her, they were attacked, they're treated like animals. You get the description of bruised and bleeding, you know, that there's some kind of greedy night of pleasure, but they're not giving me very
Explicit,
detailed, explicit, anything like that. When I go down to number 8, that's explicit to me.
And also number 7, although it describes somebody who's feeling very, very unpleasant, obviously,
Correct.
as it relates to explicit,
It doesn't give explicit detail. You understand that that's occurring, and how that character feels, but there's nothing explicit in those. In number 8, that's an explicit account.
more explicit.
I think 6 has explicit pieces in there also.
In Can you tell me a little bit more? Give me more feedback.
Every
so we can-
evening, the sailors prepared greedily for the night of pleasure.
Mhm.
But on most nights, she was just another female body to be used by one of the 40
Mhm.
or so sailors on board that awful ship.
Mhm.
That's explicit.
When I was saying explicit, John, I'm not describing the physical act. I get what you're saying too, but that just so context, that's what I was speaking about. I wasn't thinking that it was some kind of benign passage. I'm just saying that it does not describe the physical act.
I mean, she could hear the cries and screams of other women as they were being attacked. And then it goes on to describe, but he did not seem in a hurry to rape her. I mean, so that, to me, indicates the previous sentence was about a rape scene.
This is the only part that had this one. But to your point, is the whole book about that? Is there those things? There's certainly that piece, or is this a piece in that passage?
Well, I mean, I see page 47, 48, 50, 51, 56, 57. This is,
Yeah, that's over that chapter in
sprinkled
that book.
across the multiple pages, so I can only assume it's not only in these 5 pages, 6 pages. It's in more.
Yeah, I think the question is ultimately, is it explicit and detailed description? As at least as this relates, what I'm talking about right now is these are the words that right now we're kind of choosing to test, at least from the statute, so.
Yeah, it's not an easy
And
task.
that clearly can differ, and that's why we have multiple people looking at this. Do you care for us to go to the
You can,
subsequent
yep,
page?
Yep, you can. To me, number 9, that's explicit. Number 10 is explicit. You're getting into some more explicit detail in 11. You have explicit passages in these
And
ones.
11 and 12 are also, and 13 is disgusting. I don't want to read it.
So I would read those and think that they have explicit detail in them.
Yeah, I would say no to any of these.
Does anyone disagree that those passages represent something more explicit in the, 9 through 13?
Um, 13 is, it doesn't meet descriptive language, but it's obviously, you clearly get what
Right.
it's implying.
So maybe that's one to look at and analyze for larger context, or what is that piece
Well,
in it?
again, it's someone recounting their past one night when I was almost 10, so if it's part of them describing why they are the way they are today or doing something like that, that might be a relevant,
Sure.
it's just a traumatic event, again, that happened to somebody. I don't think it's done in a way where it's glorifying it. But again, coming up for discussion, obviously, of course, then it would have to be context if this is the whole point of the book. That's a different story than if this is someone recounting an event in their childhood.
Sure.
It doesn't promote it in any way versus the other ones.
It's completely inappropriate for any book that we have in our schools, still,
13, number 13, John?
yes.
Okay.
Any of this. Nobody needs to read about that. It disgusts me that even any of this is even in a book that is even considered for a school education.
They're not. Remember, I'm just grabbing you examples.
But these are
of-
clearly in some book out there.
Yes, they exist in books.
Maybe not the books that we have,
Correct,
but
they exist in
somebody,
books.
some book.
Correct.
I think there's elements in some, and I don't know if we have to necessarily finely tune, but there are some that talk about acts and steps in the process, so to speak. Those strike me as being very explicit.
I'll try and find, kind of based on this, Chad, I'll try and find maybe a more school-appropriate book that talks about kind of retelling of a traumatic event in a way that doesn't give detail, but it's, part of character development, something like that.
Right.
That may be used in books, just so we can untangle that. And
So
is there,
it can be
is
more
there a
relevant.
time when something might be appropriate to reference that this happened in the past without the detail, without, to that point of getting explicit? So I mark that to try and come up with a sample where people will go, we should all really talk about this one. I'll try and find something like that, so we could,
Yeah, I mean, even 6, I don't know what book this is from or where it comes from, but it sounds like, obviously, they're obviously kept against their will. This could be a war book for all I know.
sure. Why don't I grab like a historical context?
Yeah, I mean, that's
One
what I'm
as
saying.
well
Like, this
as-
is something that could potentially have been describing how life was as a captive and,
Yeah,
in
slave, yep.
the war or something like that, or, I mean, again, it's so hard when there's no context.
So why don't I?
Some of them are
yep.
not hard at all to,
Exactly. So why don't I, just based on this conversation, I've got really good, clear understanding. Let me find a couple passages where there's maybe a historical account without the detail, and as well as maybe an account of a character, their past, present, whatever. Again, something that doesn't have the detail, but maybe references in a way that would come up for consideration. Like, ooh, this is really worthy, and this is the one piece. Let me try and find that unicorn out there to kind of extend the discussion. Very helpful. The next one don't contain explicit, detailed descriptions of any of those categories. And again, this is me pulling those, so you might disagree, because I'm just one person, but I'm trying to spark the conversation. There's certainly a lot here. You don't have to digest all of them, but is there one like, ooh, this causes me question, or nope, I would consider that? Because that's what we want to do, is find those examples to force that conversation so that we're.
Yeah, so I see you did make our job easy. Because when you look at it, there are many examples here that I would say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I
It might
want
use the
somebody
word
to.
sex, but it's not describing it. It
It's
might
not
say
explicit
the-
in
right.
detail. So let's just pause again and go back to what we had talked about before, because simply because, let's just say, it escapes the statutory definition, doesn't necessarily mean we choose the book in the first place.
Correct.
This is just for this particular
Correct. This-
filter in the criteria.
This doesn't, this doesn't say these are in our schools, it doesn't mean that, it just means, and then it even looks, like I said, I'm not even taking into account, like, we have a hard no on for our little kids. We have, like I said, look through this with a lens of, I'm talking about an 11th and 12th grader with parental consent. And these came up as, like I said, they might use the word sex, they might use some of those words, but there's not a large description, narrative, any of those pieces.
I mean, like, number 20, for example, that's talking about someone with a brainstem injury. I mean,
Correct.
that's just those are just medical
Right.
facts.
But it had the word getting a hard on in there. So to me, I wouldn't rule that out. It doesn't meet that criteria. So these were ones that I looked and went like, well, they're not descriptive, they're not this is, again, my, me taking a look at it, interpreting, and there might be some in there like, oh, that's really pushing that envelope. Do we need to think about that one? And like I said, there's a lot of these here in this category. You might want to take some time and do a little bit of homework as a policy committee, because I think the homework that we do, the discussion we have here, will help the board engage in a meaningful discussion. And help them see different illustrations of, like you said, when would this be something, when would this, like, oh, we should have a larger conversation, kind of things, and when do we have to revise some of this language? But, yeah, there's certainly some, like I said, that have some of the words, that have some of the concepts, but
Well, and I think part of again, not to reiterate, but I will, my understanding is part of this is because we're looking at this as potential test, this language.
that's
right?
what we're doing right now. Yep.
Right. And-
We're testing it to make sure what we wrote can be picked up and interpreted by a team, and that they would also know, to your point, of, you know what, I don't know, and I can't do that. This is a conversation outside of me. It's outside curriculum committee. This should go to the board if this is something that we really need to look at.
I think these ones here, I think, are a good example of ones that may slip through, may not meet the criteria, but it's good. That's because some of these I would have no problem with, but some of these I would say, yeah, that would be appropriate to look at context. That would be appropriate to look at the book as a whole. That'd be appropriate to discuss as a bigger group. Even though they technically slide through some of the the checks and balances, I think that's why it's important to have that last option, that last piece where it's like, well, we need to bring it back for more detail or further discussion. Because some of these to me don't.
No, yeah, some of it were these
some
were
I'm
easy.
Like, even though that doesn't meet it, I think you can clearly get the intent of what's happening there.
Exactly. So I'd like you to take a look at that one and then circle back with me if you're like, ooh, that one, think about more, or show me more context, so we've got some stronger examples to go into our board discussion.
Difference, though, I think, kind of back to this whole test thing is, we may say, I don't think it's explicit or not, but what we're doing now is we're actually framing the discussion, utilizing like, oh, I think that first bullet point is it, or you know what, it's the explicit and detailed. I think we lacked that language before to even have that conversation, because you look at any of these and how do you put into words, well, I kind of have this problem with it. Now at least we have something here to say, you know what, that to me appears to be physical torture or brutality, and and I think it's explicit enough.
Yep.
Now we're able, we may disagree as to the intent, but we're able to
Absolutely.
frame the discussion.
So let me give you this interesting list. This doesn't exist as a,
Oh,
go ahead,
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say 69, 70, 72, and 73, I think would fall in the sexual incitement, reflective of produced sexual desires. I mean, they're talking about touching
Gotcha.
and this and that. Obviously, there's more in here. I would agree.
let me give you this list.
I would agree number 20 is questionable because to me, it sounds like a frustrated person with an injury.
Yep.
But maybe an inappropriate comment that probably wouldn't disqualify the book.
Right.
But I look at a lot of these other ones and I think, what educational value would a book have that has some of these context or comments in it? It just, what kind of value are we giving out? I mean, and is this the way that we want the kids in our district to be talking and thinking and acting and this and that? I mean, you talk about, I think I should strip and go naked. A boy laid naked on the bed. I mean, it's just, you're putting all this garbage in people's minds. And I don't know if it's needed.
And to your point, like you said, you're dealing with a passage without any context. If that were a one line, can I say the word naked in a book? Yep, there's probably some times when I can. Can I say some of these words in a book? Yes. So we're illustrating. Here is a category that doesn't exist, but it gets at exactly where you're going with this conversation, right? You're like, these are, there. You can see and understand there's intent behind this. So to me, these were, okay, it might not be explicit or graphic, but this is for sure an account of sexual situations. To varying degrees, but these are, without question, sexual situations.
Yeah, I would say the general, just by glancing at these, the general theme here is it's talking about a series of actions happening, one step, another step, and another step.
Yep, and maybe they don't end in a sexual act themselves, but it's leading in, it's, you know, it's sexual, a sexual situation. And they're very different in how they describe them. Some, you know, have details, some don't, but this is a sexual situation without question.
So that's one that, go ahead.
I think that the ones you just handed out, reflects or produces sexual desire. I think many of these, most of these, probably all of these are prurient in nature. And so I think as long as this rubric here isn't in any particular order of operations, then I think we're fine. Because if you're saying this would have never hit the bottom box because it didn't meet any criteria in the top box, then that's not a good use of this
Nope.
rubric. But if we're saying this rubric can be used in any order, then I would say these would have all been caught anyway.
Yeah, to your point, they're sexual
Yeah,
situations.
these would have all then had to get kicked up for higher discussion regardless anyway.
No, I agree, and I understand what you're saying. They may, you look at this and say, all right, if we were prosecuting under the statute, it's not specific enough, yet you look at it and say, not sure that this would necessarily be
I
appropriate.
could read these and
So,
easily say, this is like I said, I can easily read these and say, this is a sexual situation.
yeah.
Sure, yeah.
And, yep, and as to your point, what's the greater good, what's the book, what's that, but
And I would say these are, yes, descriptive sexual scenes that don't belong in books.
But again, I'll reiterate, at least so far, and we could decide if the words are exactly right, I appreciate the fact that there's this framework now that we actually
Yep.
can have this discussion, so.
So I think it helped, like I said, it helped frame our discussion where we're like, oh, yeah, that's a line, or oh, that's a discussion, or oh, this needs context, or these pieces. So take a look, kind of reflect on it a little bit more in those pieces. I've got some yeses, nos, I've got kind of, so I've got another task to kind of get some passages that would be, you know, like you said, what would be something that is an immediate, like, no, that book doesn't exist here. Or, like I said, something that we actually might consider a real text that maybe has something to that we would put in front of you. But I think this has helped us test language
Right.
and go on things to help frame the board conversation. I think, too, it helps the board kind of where we took it apart, reflect on the process. Like I said, I watched kind of the curriculum committee struggle with just a really big conversation versus let's chunk one thing at a time. So think about approach, if there's anything you've got to recommend as we think about having a next conversation with our full board on topic.
Well, I think it showed the fact that you'll never reach perfection in any kind of outline because it works both ways. There's some stuff that slipped through technically, but everyone reading it is like, yeah, that shouldn't probably be included.
Right.
Right.
And then there's stuff that gets caught because of a definition, but again, that one example of someone describing a spinal cord injury, I mean, that, if that never, you know, I mean, that just goes the other way to show that sometimes things get caught and ruled out, or would have been ruled out, even though that wasn't its intent.
Yeah.
So I think it's, you know, it just, to me, says that you're never gonna have something where you can't just go only by every word on the page, because it works both ways.
So as for next steps, so you give some other examples, we'll be able to think about it. Let's just talk about next approach. Let's say hypothetically, we reach a point where either this description or we modify it a little bit, we say, you know, this looks pretty good. Do we believe that the next point of discussion would be at the full board? Or is it more, it probably would be there, right? Because otherwise we could give it to the curriculum committee and say, try this and see what you think. But
You could do that both ways. Like I said, I watched them struggle through. We could grab some passages and have them retest it and walk them through a little bit and see where they land before we bring it back to the board, or we can take it back to the full board. I think either way is a valid process.
I mean, my thought would be curriculum committee can do their thing, and when they have ones like they did previously, if they're like, well, here's ones
Questions.
where we're really, as a committee, we're stuck, we need to bring it to a full board, then
Perfect.
that's fine. I don't think the full board needs to look at every,
And what I'll do is I'll ask that
Maybe
I facilitate that agenda item with them based on our conversation. I'll work with them to grab, like I said, some more real-world examples of books that might actually be considered versus just our test passages. And then we'll work that through. And then through committee, we'll report to the full board on, hey, how'd that go? Is it ready for a larger discussion to kind of expand? Because we are proposing to expand that sexual content in the policy. We still have one more piece that's in there, and that's the obscene language piece. So we've dealt with the graphic violence, we're working our way through sexual content, and then next is obscene language.
I think as I think about it, the idea of giving it to the curriculum committee, they're kind of boots on the ground on this. Because if we go back, I'm envisioning, if we go back to the full board, likely the conclusion would be the curriculum committee would say, great, we'll give it a try, and then we'll come back. We can maybe
Yeah.
save that step to say, well, let us know, because if they run into huge roadblocks or obstacles, well, then we know that as well, and we just need to do more work at the committee level. And lastly, likely they'd be testing it kind of using the same procedure perhaps that we did, and maybe that's a little bit more appropriate for a committee meeting, almost like a work session, if you
I
will.
think even this, kind of visualizing it and walking them through and go through a facilitated process, I think that's helpful. And then I think taking some real texts, like I said, that we wouldn't use in there, because I think it is nice to have extreme examples, because I think how quickly everyone sat at this table and went, yep, we all agree on that. Yep, we all agree on that. There's more agreement than disagreement. You just get into the weeds on a couple things, so it's finding some more rich, robust examples of that.
yeah. I mean, the things that come to the full board should be things that don't immediately reach full agreement, obviously.
Yeah.
That would be the point.
Like I said, so it's a good exercise, then I'll walk them through, and that's what we'll do for our next step on that. Perfect. And
Okay.
if you've got any reflection, just reach out so that I can help refine that process for them. Perfect.
Great. Well, like I said, at least we have some language where it can help us, use common language to have the discussion. That's
Yeah.
helpful. And we'll see what the curriculum committee says. I know they're boots on the ground on this, so
I think that'll be helpful for them.
excellent. All right. Lastly, we have the review of the 100 series, board operations.
Sure. So the 100 series is around board operations. The full list is there, and then I've got two different attachments. I've got one set for revision and discussion. They're listed at the very end. Consider revisions of the following, see attached. So I've got those listed, and I'm going to walk us through those right now first. The second bucket is, well, I'll get to the second bucket after we get through the first. How about that?
Okay?
Because they're connected. All right, so if you can open up that first PDF set, it's going to walk you through each one.
The one that says for revision
Revision
and
and
discussion.
discussion.
Yep.
For revision and discussion, we're starting with 113. I've got some keynotes. 113 has been in the news lately because it's connected to Title IX, and you can see districts, there's some federal guidelines They're contesting some pieces of the law. It's coming out of Kansas, but there's implications for every district and every state in that challenge, those kinds of pieces. And you saw some districts adopt because they felt like they were up against this August 1 deadline. So I don't feel that because there's 3 people that interpret Title IX here. You have Lenny Hansen as the Director of HR, interprets the end around the adults in the organization. You have Emily Melstrand, who interprets on behalf of students, and then myself. We're your 3 trained people. And there's some nuances that we're aware of in there. So it's been very interesting. I actually talked with legal guidance on this, and I said, I don't even meet till August 6th. You know, is this something? And he goes, no, you don't have to do something right now. It's relatively low risk. I still have to follow federal and state laws. What I have down on this doesn't. I still have to follow that. I still have to do that. We don't have issues coming forward under this. I think I've had one that we reviewed in this context in all my years here, and we had legal guidance on that, and it did not move forward. The only thing when I reviewed that 113, our current 113, so I don't recommend that we step into the fray on any of the changes related to new things at all. And even legally, when I asked, I said, well, what if I don't do something? And he said, you're fine. That's a very low risk. There's nothing that you have to do right now. I said, yeah, they all need to figure it out, and I'm going to stick with status quo right now. The only thing that I saw in there was we've been trying to systematically remove references to policies within a policy, and it references the other ones around students, the 411 and the 512. And 512 has been updated. I think it says 512.1, and that we updated it to 512. So it's just an out-of-date reference in there. And then there's one on the title that says pupil services. The title is student services director now instead. So there's only 2 things. But I also don't want us to get caught up in, like I said, it's become quite a hot button. Those recommendations, we don't even need to touch right now. If we want to wait, and if there's something to bring forward in the future, once litigation and all that goes through, I'm comfortable with that as well. Why would I even put this forward right now is my thought.
So there's nothing in here that's how would I want to say this? That's a promise that we would be making.
No.
That under the new law that we wouldn't still have to make the promise. In other words, we're
No.
over-promising because the new law pulled some things back. That's not the case.
No, I don't need to update this policy to be, like I said,
Right.
let them sort out what they've got going on. If we were to be, the complaint procedures there, one of the things that you have to make sure you have in your new policy, which we already have, let me find, it's where, do I have a clear complaint process? Do I have my people listed? Do I have all that? We have all those pieces. That's why we don't need to step into this right now, is my recommendation.
Agree.
Yeah, I mean, this falls into the category of some laws that, like you said, I mean, my understanding is they've been challenged and will have guidance at some point in the future, but it doesn't sound like this
Let
is an
that
issue of
challenge-
high
yeah.
risk.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Let that challenge go through, let that dust settle, and then we'll respond, is my recommendation. Again, it's very clear if people think that they have a complaint, who, the process for a complaint, who they go to, all of that, that is all there. It's all sound. The AR is accompanying, we're good. I don't recommend anything. So if this committee is comfortable with that, I wouldn't even bring forward the couple
Nope.
pieces at this point. I
I
would
s-
let it wait.
We should continue to follow current
Yeah.
law until it's
Yep, our
amended
current
or
policy is
not.
fine.
Any objections? And then we'll just
No, I
do a
agree
wait and see.
to stay where we're at.
Yeah.
Don't adopt the new law. I mean, there's current court rulings and injunctions already in place across the country in different areas, and, there's lots of legalities behind some of these things that I think we'd be opening up ourselves to lots of liability if we did take it, so.
Yeah, and like I
Fine.
said, if something came forward, we would, and had that, and we needed to interpret that, we would have legal support to do that. So again, it's a low risk, thank you
And
for that,
no, that
supporting
makes-
that recommendation.
That makes sense. I was just going to say just furtherance of what John was saying, that if all of a sudden, wow, there was something that happened that the Department of Justice is taking a different rule, we would know about that, we would be receiving
Correct.
legal guidance, WASB would be informing us. and-
Our own attorneys, through those avenues, we would be covered. So again, I don't think it should come forward at all right now.
Right, sounds like that's our,
Perfect. I will still,
Recommendation
like
is
I
we'll
said, I'll
stand pat.
I'll keep those changes in mind, though, I'll document them. Like I said, those circular references, but again, they're not harmful right now. 133 is the policy on filling board vacancies. So you'll see school board highlighted. When I get to 151, we'll talk about that. So we've been using school board interchangeably, so that the context that I want you to focus on for right now is in number 2 on appointment. It says, any qualified elector of the district who's interested in filling the vacancy may submit a letter of application. Well, I need them to do that, otherwise I don't know
Oh.
that they're interested. So I would suggest moving that
Must.
word to shall. They do need to submit a letter so that I know
Mhm.
that they're interested, otherwise,
that's a necessary precursor,
it is.
and you have
Yep.
to make it either a
Yep,
shall or a
they
must.
They have to notice us that they have interest so they can be brought forward. And again, this is if someone were to leave a term early and the board is faced with filling the vacancy. So I have a recommendation on using the word shall. And on the second page there, number 2 had the number 3 sentences in it. And I'm recommending that number 3 stand alone. If after 5 rounds of voting, you reach a deadlock, and then the pieces that were 4 and 5, that's actually related to a deadlock. So this is a formatting piece. All the words can stay the same.
I'm sorry, Superintendent, which paragraph are you on? I'm sorry, I've
So
lost.
it's in the second
Page 21.
page.
Okay, I'm in the wrong document, that would be why I'm lost.
On policy 133, the second page, when you get into how you're appointing someone.
Thank you.
Yeah, on number 2, you can see a green 3 there. That's because that sentence used to live under number 2, and it shouldn't. It should be its own thought, and what were 4 and 5, that should be sub-bullets as A and B under that, when I look at and review the format of it. So it's, if you were to reach a deadlock as a board, right? Let's say you're doing rounds of voting on who the new board member is because you're having to select them. This is what you do if you hit deadlock. And again, not changing the language, just cleaning up how that is, because again, those are subpoints of that.
Yeah, looks fine.
Okay, I see, yeah,
Yep.
it's more process around, okay, here are the
Correct.
steps.
Yep, it's just 2 subpoints related to deadlock only.
Mhm.
And then the very last line, it says, according to the administrative rule, there isn't. It's literally this policy. So
That's a good catch,
we're
too.
going to fill these according to this policy, is how we're going to do that.
Looks good.
Does make sense.
Okay. The next one is the AR, and I just wanted to clean up some pieces on the AR. So you'll see in that last policy specifically, this is the style guide that goes with policy. I didn't have any recommendations on how we make policy or the process, but I've got some recommendations on the style so that we can move some things forward. So kind of after the bullet points where they say school board or board, district, superintendent, vice president, they're saying, here's generally how we say things. So they had called out prior, hey, some policies refer to Board of Education, school board, or board. So it was saying statutes refer to the body as a school board. Use this expression going forward. So we've been cleaning up that.
Mhm.
Now, we noticed in this series, you use school board, but then sometimes you'll drop off the word school and use the word board. So, we're really talking about the style of this. So is it always school board? Is it sometimes school board? And that's where if you look at that second packet, if we decide to go with school board, then we should touch, if you open up that second packet, you can see all the instances where we've been just, it drops off. Like maybe they say school board first, but then it might just say board. And I was saying style-wise, if we're talking about the whole entity, then should it always be school board? And if it's later in the same sentence, you could say board, because you already said school board.
Is there any other board?
Sure, there's other boards all around. This is your board. But in statute, it specifically calls them school boards, so you're not talking about any other board.
So statute uses the phrase school board.
School
Just
board.
use
Then
school
that's
board.
probably what we should use.
So, yep, so we can, and like I said, we can, and I think when I look at the style, it looks like maybe in the beginning of the policy, we set it up as school board, and then after it's referred to as the board. So I just want, as we take this swing at consistency, I just want to have a conversation about that.
Cornwall School Board.
So go with school board in every instance. Now, I did say if it talked about, kind of style-wise, then if it was talking, so that's school board and the board as an entity. If they're talking about a board member, I didn't put a school board member. Could we stick with board member because we're already establishing school board somewhere else? Or do you want it school board every time?
I mean, if it's not that challenging to make it school board, then just make it school board.
For
Like if you
everything?
can just search the word and then
We
put,
can.
then just make it school board.
Okay, so as we go through these, then we'll automatically clean up for that instance.
Yeah.
And we'll
Yeah,
always
that'll be
just
easy
say
to
school
search for.
board, a
Yeah.
school board member, school board, that every
Yeah.
time we say board, we're gonna say school board.
That's one of those things, I'm sure it's going to make it a little longer and maybe a little clunky, but it's very consistent.
They're also easy to clean up, and we can do that, like I said, through, as we did with consent, where you were revising just the date, like, these all represent us changing every instance to this. And we'll do it one set at a time as we go, because we're fine legally and policy-wise, we're fine in what's written, but I just wanted to clean up this style guide. So to further clean it up, we are ready now in this, as we start with the 100 series, to start using the online portal that we have in Board Docs. Because right now, you still see, we still kick it back over in a different format. So on that second page there, it talks about chapter, section, title, number, et cetera. If I use the online portal, it follows this exactly, so I'm just cleaning up the style guide to reflect that. So it tells you it's in your policy manual, it tells you what series it's in, it tells you the exact title, it tells you what the code is, the status. So right now, you can see the ones we're touching are up for revision, when it was adopted and when it was last revised. So I'm setting that so that it would match and we can convert to this online portal. Because then you can see things. I have a question then about style on the last revised. So for some policies, there's one date and it's spelled out. And for others, we have a list in numerical, 11/5/72, and list every time it was ever revised. In last revised, do you want it to reflect the last revision only
That would-
and have it spelled out there? You still have an archive
Yeah.
of older things, but just for this and consistency, to me, like,
It
just
says
when was it
last.
last
It says
revised? It's
last,
one
so-
singular date, and I would fall in line to that format.
If it said dates revised.
Exactly.
But it says last revised, so just,
And again, you still have your historical archive, so I can know all that, and I know when it was adopted, and when it was last revised.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, right, as long as there's an archive, because generally, if I'm looking at it, it's, okay, has it been 5 years since we last looked at this? Has it been 1 year? And so the parade of dates, while interesting if you were doing some back research, really the main core is
And
how
that
long has it
archive
been
still
since we last
exists.
touched it?
yeah, I mean, so in 164, on page 24, for example, there it says last revised and then also prior revised dates. So I don't
Yeah.
know that we need a I don't know that there's any relevance to prior revised dates because the last revise, you would assume includes all previous revisions.
Correct.
Plus whatever you're changing right now.
Correct.
Even if you literally changed it back to exactly what it said in 1984, it's still last revised today. So,
Perfect. So we'll clean up, like I said, that helps me with that next set where we're like, okay, let's figure out what alignment looks like. There's also another piece where it dictates 11-point font. In this portal, it's hard to read at 11 point. I'd like to just use whatever font I need to. I'll stick with Arial, but the size, I'd like to scale so that I'm ensuring that it's readable.
sure.
Makes sense.
So I'll
No, I
stick
have no
with
problem with
Arial,
that.
but I'll and I don't need the heading style. I missed that on a cross out, because that's a reference to old Word documents. Right now, Board Docs is working on getting line items so that we could more easily say, to your point, like, hey, on line 78, it says this. That's how people are accustomed to looking at policy. We've made that request of Board Docs so that they could do that for the markups, because they do a nice job in a markup format, and then you could even see them very easily in your Board Doc stuff, but they need to catch up with. So I just removed that, as well as the word draft, because they'll say up for revision, they'll say those pieces. And then I took out the reference to making it easier to move to a web-based platform. We're kind of there.
Right.
So I just wanted to get your sense of style. So then we'll clean up that whole next set based on what we talked about, and these 100s that you see, even that second batch, we'll clean it up to what we just set too.
I vote for consistency and clarity.
Oh,
Makes
don't we
sense.
all? Perfect. All right, so then I'll clean up that, and then the whole 100 series you see would be in alignment with those. So we'll clean up that. 161, that was just cleaning up school board, and then there was a reference to district administrator, but that's the superintendent.
Okay.
So that was just cleaning up that one piece, so no real big discussion. It was just bigger than the word school board, which is what the other bucket was, literally just all the times I was adding school board. So I wanted to call that out.
Okay.
164, I don't have any recommendation for language shift, but I got legal guidance on your annual salary. This was a question because school districts do it all different ways. And our district has always brought the board salary, it's part of the annual meeting. And it does not need to be. It only needs to come forward when you want it to change. Or someone in that annual meeting could make a motion to change it, because that's their right as well. But we don't need to put it on there.
I see.
So we were asked about, wouldn't it be more efficient if you didn't have to have all of these all the time, especially if
There's no
you're not advocating
change.
for a change? You know, it's still someone's right as a public member to call that out, and we can add that. But if it's not, and so I asked if I had to change any language, and he said, no, you're in a legally defensible position to not have it on your annual meeting. If you're not bringing forward a change, you've got document of what was done, what that salary is. He's like, you don't have to put it on that annual meeting. Again, it doesn't, someone could bring that up if they wanted to.
But it's
so
not
it
a
doesn't
standing.
block them, but that's why he was saying, he's like, you don't really need language for that, and you're fine. Because I said, do I need to update this saying unless there's a change? And he said, no. You're in a fine position to just leave that off the annual meeting, and if someone wants to make a motion to that effect, we would do that. It's their right.
So if board members wanted to change, if we talked about we want to change salaries up or down, whatever it may be, that would have to go to
Correct.
that meeting for approval.
Correct.
But
It always does, anytime, but your status quo until there's a motion to change it.
right, either made by the school board or by
A member
okay.
of the public.
And it would seem like that would make the meeting run more efficiently.
Just say it's one
Especially-
less thing to have to do at that meeting.
We generally don't ask for any changes. I mean,
Yeah.
so
So what I would do is I would just put in an AR right behind this and just say, here are the salaries established on X date, and call it. Then they're there, they're publicly accessible, and unless you're calling for them, you don't need that there. Great.
it seemed to make sense.
And again, that doesn't restrict anyone's right to make a motion to do otherwise. 165.1, this is about board members, and it gets into their rights to be, I want to draw your eye to around your ability to serve as a volunteer coach, a supervisor of an extracurricular activity, and here's the part that's new, they expanded bus driver. So you always had those, and that language was in there. And you can see I've got some strike through because it's all about being a coach or a supervisor. And I just grabbed the I see we got a typo there, and the second one. I just grabbed the statute language right below. Here's the conditions in which you can serve as a volunteer coach or supervisor. Here's the conditions as a bus driver. And those are right from the statute below. So this is expanding that you do have the ability to be a volunteer bus driver, and then the conditions to which you have to meet for each one.
And that's drawn from the statute,
Mhm.
statutory?
Yep, I cut and pasted it.
It would seem to make sense. That would be an exception to a potential conflict of interest and
So,
authorized by the statute.
yep, and so here's some other pieces that I made notes on. So if they meet all this, can I authorize that?
Without school board approval?
If
Yeah.
they meet all those conditions, it's set forth in policy, and I navigate that. The one that was interesting to me is, and this is how it's written in the statute, the school board receives the results of a criminal background investigation of the school board member. So anytime someone serves in a volunteer capacity like that, we do a background check. None of you, have signed on to new roles since I've been here. John's a volunteer coach, you volunteer in different capacities. All those things were taken care of in the past. I just thought that was weird. That is how it's written.
And that's how it's written in the statute.
Yeah.
And that's how it should.
Well, then, because that'll then be brought to the school board anyway.
It doesn't say
you're-
that I have to bring it in a board meeting. It doesn't
Sure.
dictate to how. So,
Well, your original question was, let's say a school board member says, I'd like to volunteer, the statute authorizes it, the policy authorizes it. I think your first question was that something then that the superintendent can say, great, you've checked all the boxes, and so here you go, without additional board approval? I mean, my thought is the answer to that is yes, for a number of reasons. One is, well, the school board's gonna get the results of the criminal background investigation, but the second is, if you had a member of the public who's not a school board member, and they checked all the boxes, he wouldn't come to us either.
correct. So here's how I would interpret this, that I have the authorization. So let's say Chad wants to become a volunteer advisor for a new club, and you go through that, and I would just disclose to the board that he is serving in a volunteer and that he has checked all these. I just need to give you the results that, yes, he passed the criminal. I don't interpret this as I need to give you his criminal background check, because we've already set through the volunteer policies. Remember, we talked about those conditions for volunteers and all that kind of stuff, those different layers of people. So we would just want to be transparent around that. You're serving at this, there's no salary, you're fine.
Yeah.
But I think if your question is, you have to wait 2 weeks for a board meeting until that happens?
I
No.
think
No.
that I can do that, and
Yeah.
I can just tell you, like,
Informed.
hey, heads up, like I said, Chad's serving as this, John serves as, John had his checks, like, we're good to go. They serve in those capacities.
Yeah, I think that's how it should be, because we've already, the board is in charge of the policy committee, and then the board is in charge of making sure this policy is what we want. So if this policy's criteria is met, it doesn't need to come back to us to say, yep, it met the criteria that we already set.
Correct.
Yeah, and the
That's
statute,
redundant,
Yep.
so.
And this-
That's how I'm interpreting it. So now, let's say I run into a situation where someone doesn't pass. I wouldn't pass that person through. So I'm not authorizing that person.
Right.
Is there a secondary board review of that? So if a person, for some reason, doesn't pass, and we've never had this situation, never had that, it's just when I look at some samples there generally is a process where they could talk with the board about that.
If they want to appeal it,
Yeah.
yeah, isn't,
but I mean, I don't think we have to have an appeal, like, we don't have to have a second process unless they want to appeal it.
Right.
So I
we
don't,
have a general appeals process, don't we? I mean, sort
Well,
of,
I could put something in there around,
We
you know,
also have new business. I could just bring it up as new business.
you could,
I could just.
but in
ask
there
it
I
to be
could,
an
I could
agenda
say, they can be authorized by the superintendent, those not authorized by the superintendent could be authorized by the board, and leave it at that.
item.
I think that's,
Both of you were like, nope, okay, tell me more.
I just think that's dividing the entire system here. I mean,
Okay.
I think we trust you enough to do some of these pieces. Why would,
We
if
can
they
say
don't
no.
pass because of reasons of
And
legal,
they're-
then why would we pass them also?
Agreed. And if they feel
That's where
strongly,
the bar is. It's a cut and paste
yeah.
on there.
I view this as, well, first of all, if there could have been additional language in the statute if, for instance, they thought, oh, it has to come for full school board approval, or there's an appeals process. I think the other part is, I view this as, if a school board member wants to volunteer in this capacity, and that's great, right? They're kind of occupying the role of a layperson volunteer. That's exclusively, I would say, in the superintendent's discretion. I don't know that I would create some sort of special
Perfect.
carve out for a school board member, and anyone can appeal. I mean, according to the policy that we have, there is an appeals process.
The
I
only
leave
thing
that
that,
stand.
and the only thing, like I said, that we would help manage, and I think that's, so let's say Chad becomes the advisor of some co-curricular, and now Chad wants $1 million from the referendum to update the XYZ facilities. You know, there's things like that where,
Sure.
because it talks about, you know, then don't vote on things that
Yeah,
are
you'd have to
directly.
abstain.
Yep.
I'd have to
Yeah,
abstain.
right.
But to John, like, John's voting on the comprehensive co-curricular stuff. He's not a paid person. He's not that. He should be able to still vote on those things. Those positions aren't paid, but let's say you're serving as a volunteer football coach. The coaches are paid, but you're not singling out and asking to vote on, hey, here's the, you know, football coach's salary. You're in totality of a
Like a
piece.
budget,
So,
yeah.
and again, we're aware of those. We would help guide people, so.
If it was sports specific, I would argue that he would have to abstain. If it was all school coaches, no.
Right, that's,
But if it was only the football coaches that he volunteers for, well, then I would say that it does,
Correct.
it actually fits under, it's just the wording.
Yep.
You would have to abstain because it impacts the activity you
and
we're
are.
that-
picking on you, John, but you're the one who's a volunteer coach.
And
but
I don't
he's-
even
no
I don't get paid.
one gets paid.
So it's super.
So no
double
one gets paid in
hypothetical.
that
Yeah.
because
No
it's
one
not a
does.
sanctioned sport, so
No.
everyone is over there working for free.
That's
There's
what
no
I'm
conflict.
just using it as an example. I'm just saying, if
Yeah.
it were coach specific.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know, if it
Correct,
were,
that's
if
what
it
I'm
were
saying.
all coaches, then no, he wouldn't
it-
have to abstain. Because
correct.
he's not benefiting his organization above any other.
And that approach
It's how
follows.
it's written, it's how it would be interpreted, and so I think those updates are just fine, and I would, do you want me to specifically write in that these can be authorized by the superintendent?
Yes.
I think so, because it just kind of for the avoidance of doubt later on.
Perfect. I will add that. Thank you for that. 166. 166 is a policy specifically around email. And then there's certainly some updates to lean on that is more expansive. Tim has reviewed these, so right behind it is green language that just is, it's a wider lane than just email around that. So we'd ask for you to take a look. He was recommending, like, yeah, just go to the new language. But we'll want you to look at and see, is there any pieces you want to draw on? Are there pieces that you don't agree with? Because it's bigger than just email. And in that new, do you want some of it, like some of those questions, you know, do you want some of that to be a supplementary AR and have a cleaner, smaller policy? It's really up to you.
So the idea for the new policy language, and I think you said this in the beginning, the old one was really email focused.
Mhm.
This one's a bit broader.
Mhm. Why don't you just take some time and look at that one? Because again, we meet quarterly on those pieces. It's something certainly we could ask everyone to weigh in because everyone's subject to that. We could take this for a richer discussion with the full board because everyone uses different platforms, different things. So we could do that as well. And
Yeah, I
just say,
wonder if-
hey, the committee's looking at, can you give us some
Initial feedback. I think that's a good idea. I think this is one that makes sense for us to really digest and get additional feedback before we propose wording. I think more minds are better than,
And everyone uses different platforms, different things. They're going to go through that with a different lens, so. Is that an okay approach with the group, that we kind of bring that?
Yeah.
I bring that
Perfect.
as, this one's under revision. We'd appreciate other
Yeah.
eyes and guidance on it.
Yep.
Okay.
Because we also use these policies to train on, so when I onboard new members, and then every spring, when we seat our new board, we go through this series with you. 185 was just, we said we'd circle back when we touched the series. We removed 880, and it had a reference to citizens advisories committees, and we just said it is more fitting for this policy. So it's just that language picked up. When we made those changes, we said we would put it in here.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Good on those? So then if you look at that second set, they were more that style piece that we just talked about. 119 didn't have any changes, we just did that. But if you look at, it's hard to see on some of them.
You just made the formatting changes.
It's the format for the new portal, and it's throwing the word school board in there.
Yeah.
So again, that would be a series where we're updating, we reviewed. There are no updates on those ones that we recommend. We either recently touched those or they're still relevant. So we would update the style, and then we would update the review date. So then we're setting that cycle.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll clean up, like I said, based on even what we were saying about the last review date. We'll take another pass at those, just so they're cleaned up. Can I advance these pieces then, as we talked about? Again, not advancing for any kind of reading or action on the email one, just more for conversation, but going ahead to advance these for first readings on the other slate, both on our revisions and our review dates.
I think so. I think it also gives us opportunity, if we have second thoughts, we'll reach out to you, but
Yeah.
at first reading is another opportunity for us to raise questions.
I'll make them in the 3 buckets then. The one that we're just simply bringing forward as a discussion item, because it's pretty comprehensive, impacts everyone with electronic communications. Then I'll bring forward the ones that we had discussion and we're recommending some changes, and the other that we're updating the review date and just the nuance of school board and the style changes.
Yeah, some
So
more
that they can see
cosmetic
them.
only, right?
Mhm, so that they can see those easily.
Okay.
That's all I had for the
Anything on
100
those?
series.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that was our last discussion item. So unless there are objections, we have adjourn as our next agenda item. Any objections to adjourning? No. Not hearing any. All right. We will consider then our policy committee meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone, for going through all these items. And Superintendent Wimmer, thanks for preparing them.